Certainly great to have you here. This week there has been a miracle in my family. My sister, who lives in Lebanon, has a small dog who learned on Friday how to fly. 7-pound dog goes outside, 60-mile-an-hour gust of wind. I am not making this up. This is true. And all of a sudden, without having any sense of wings, that dog just sort of took off and flew about 10 feet. I'm thinking, wow. So as a skinny person, I understand that. You got to be careful when you're out there because you could go flying, so that's an issue. All of us today, though, I assume you didn't fly away. You're still here? Anybody? Okay, we're all good. It is really, really good to have you here. Hey, when you came in this morning, you were given a program. Inside the program, there's a card. We call it the connection card. It really is our lifeline to you. So if you could take a moment during our time together today and fill that out, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you're new with us, if you could put down as much information as you are comfortable with, we would greatly, greatly appreciate that. From time to time here at CrossPointe, some special things happen. We'd love to have the opportunity just to be able to shoot you an email, shoot you a text to remind you about that. Well, I'm excited about today because we're going to talk about self-reliance and God-dependence. Self-reliance and God-dependence. And the issue is that you and I have got to understand that self-reliance can really, really ultimately bring difficulty into your life where when you and I decide, hey, I'm going to be God-dependent, you know what it does? It wipes out the worry that you and I tend to face. Well, I'm going to pray with you this morning that God would really speak to you in a major, major way. Would you pray with me right now? Father, thanks for loving us, for taking care of us, for always being there for us. And I pray that you would help us to understand today that you are incredibly reliable. Remind us of that today. Help us to understand that when we try to live our lives our way, it ultimately never, never, ever works. So speak to us. Help us to reflect upon who you are, what you want to do in our lives. And now as we continue to worship you and try and get an understanding of who you are, I pray that you would show up in our lives. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. Would you?
September 1939, Germany dropped 100 tons of bombs on 16 British cities. 100 tons of bombs on 16 British cities. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister, made a speech shortly after that. Rather famous speech, at least parts of it are. Here's what he said. Never give in, never, 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 never in nothing great or small, large or petty, never yield to force, never yield to apparently overwhelming might of the enemy, never give in. Sounds like great advice, doesn't it? I mean, if your nation is under attack, 100 tons of bombs have been dropped on your cities. Wow, it just sounds like good stuff. Now, shortly before that took place, they made some home publicity posters because they were trying to prepare their people for war. They made 3 home publicity posters, the first of which said this. Now, keep in mind, we're about to go into war. Here's the first poster. Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory. I'm thinking, that doesn't quite ring the bell for me. Just be cheerful. Yes, they're dropping bombs, but in the end, it's going to be okay. The second one was a tad bit better, but not great. Here's what the second one was. Freedom is in peril. In other words, we're about to die. Everybody run. That's what that said to me. The third one you might actually recognize. I am sure that most of you have heard of this. The third one was this. Keep calm and carry on. Keep calm and carry on. That maxim has been blown up today, and now there are about 2.5 million mock-ups of that phrase. Keep calm and carry on. Now, the irony of that is, even though they produced 2.5 million posters, they didn't distribute one of them. They just stayed in an office someplace. They didn't distribute one of them. Keep calm and carry on. In other words, look, it's messy now, it's tough right now, but relax. It's going to be okay. Don't you want somebody to tell you that? It's going to be okay. When you're 5 years old and you fall and you skin your knee, you run to your mom. Not your dad, incidentally. They always run to your mom, right? Because the dad's like, toughen up, sucker, you're fine. The mom's like, oh, honey, let me kiss the boo-boo, okay? So you run to your mom, and she says, in essence, keep calm. Carry on. It's going to be okay. If you're here today and you are a follower of Jesus, I got good news for you. He says this, keep calm and carry on. I got this. Now, if you're here today and you're going, you know what, I just sort of was drugged here, or I came here because I'm trying to explore the Jesus thing, it is great to have you in the house today. Because God wants you to wrestle through who he really is. And he says this to you, and he says it to me. He says, look, I want to be your shepherd. As a matter of fact, Peter said that in 1 Peter chapter 2. He says this. He says that you were like sheep who were gone astray. You used to be roaming out there on your own. But now you've returned to the shepherd and the overseer of your souls. A shepherd has two responsibilities with a sheep. He provides for the sheep. He protects the sheep. He provides for the sheep. He protects the sheep. God says to you today, he goes, look, understand that you are like a sheep. You're a lamb. He says, and I'm going to provide for you. Keep calm and carry on. I'm going to provide for you. And he says, I will then protect you. But I know what you could be thinking. You think, you know, that might sound good, but it doesn't always seem to work for me. It seems like I'm losing some battles here. Have you been down that road? Seems like my life is a bit out of control. Seems like life is more messy than I would like it to be, so I'm having a hard time of keeping calm and carrying on. It is always going to be easier to be anxious and worry rather than to decide I am going to trust God that he is going to allow me to keep calm and ultimately carry on. I want you to write down a verse. It's not in your notes. You'll want to jot this down. It's in Romans chapter 8 and verse 37. Romans chapter 8 and verse 37. Incidentally, if you don't have a Bible, we give Bibles out for free. And they're in the back. You could grab one on your way out. Romans chapter 8 and verse 37. It's on page 787 if you have a Bible like we give out for nothing in the back, which you'll want to grab one on your way out if you don't have one. Here's what it says. In all of these things, Paul says, as he's writing to the church of Rome, and all of these things, you go, okay, what things? What's he talking about? He's been talking about that God really loves you no matter what you're going through. And he lists some of the things that they were going through. This is what he listed earlier in the chapter. In all of these things, he goes, if you're going through trouble, if you're going through hardship, if you're going through persecution, if you're going through famine, if you're going through nakedness, you're homeless, if you're in danger, if you're facing death, he says, in all of these things, here comes the phrase, catch it, we are more than conquerors. We're not just conquerors. We are more than conquerors. He says you are a hyper-conqueror. In other words, you can keep calm and carry on because at the end of the day, you are going to win. It's going to be okay. God says, I'm going to protect you. God says, I'm going to provide for you. You go, how do I get that? Let me get you to the end of the verse. Let's go back and review it. Here's what it said. In all of these things, in trouble, in hardship, in persecution, in death, we are more than conquerors through him who conquered, through him who decided he loved us. God says this to you, look, I am not only your shepherd, I am the lover of your soul, and I have your best interest at heart, and I will take care of you. I will protect you. So here's the question. How in the world does that work? I'm going to give you a verse. You tell me where it's from. Here it is. God helps those who help themselves. You know where that's found? Thomas Edison said that. Jesus didn't say that. There's a reason Jesus didn't say that. He doesn't say, look, you get in a battle, you start to fight, and if you can't win, I'll join you. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say God helps those who help themselves. He goes, look, if you're going to rely upon yourself, you're going to lose. We're going to talk today about self-reliance. We've been talking about things that you and I need to escape from, and I want to encourage you today that you've got to escape from trying to rely upon yourself to get through the tough times of life. So I want you to take 15 seconds and just assess your life. 15 seconds. Are you going through tough times right now? And if you are, Are you trying to work through those things on your own? Because if you are, you're going to be anxious ultimately. You're going to be miserable, and you're going to fail. Nobody wants that, right? Reliance, self-reliance, is the idea of relying on your own power, relying on your own resources rather than the resources of others. And God says this to you. He goes, look, I'm powerful, and I have resources. I will take care of you. There's an interesting passage, and what you and I would know as the Old Testament is found in 1 Samuel chapter 4, which is on page 187. You might want to turn there. 1 Samuel chapter 4. It's on page 187. It's an interesting passage, and what we're going to talk about today, Roman numeral number 1 in your notes, is this. Self-reliance is a seemingly good quality. It's a seemingly good quality. Now, I'm not giving you an excuse to be a slacker. I'm not saying, hey, you don't really have to do anything. Just rely on everybody else. You don't even have to get a job. The government's going to take care of you. You don't have to worry. I'm not saying that. What I'm talking about, though, is that you and I, when we encounter difficulty, saying, you know what, I'm going to work my way out of this. I am going to think my way through this. I am a problem solver. Talking about that. So Roman numeral number 1 is this. Self-reliance is a seemingly good quality, but number 1 beneath that is this. Self-reliance can lead to unexpected consequences. Self-reliance can lead to unexpected consequences. I want to take you to that passage, 1 Samuel chapter 4, and beginning with verse 1, we're going to look at verse 1 and 2 here. Here's what it says. Now the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. The Israelites decide, you know what? Our enemy's over there, we're over here. We don't like those guys. We're going to fight against them. It says the Israelites camped at Ebenezer and the Philistines camped at Aphek. The Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, and as the battle spread, now listen to this phrase, as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. They've lost. 4,000 soldiers wiped out. Interestingly enough, typically, they would go into battle because God says it's time to go into battle. Not this time. They just decide, you know what, we're going to do what we think we need to do. I don't know about you, but for me, you know when I get in trouble? When I do what I think I need to do. There's an interesting chapter. You don't have to turn there, just listen to it. It's found 11 chapters later. In chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, it says this, arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. Think about that. Arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. If you and I are self-reliant, there is a really good possibility we get arrogant. Now, some of us are verbally arrogant, but some of us are subtly arrogant. Some of us, we're sort of stubborn on the quiet side. You know what I'm talking about? Here's what it says again. Arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. What's idolatry? Idolatry is saying there is another God. It is not the God of the heavens. It is another God. In this case, if you and I are self-reliant, if we're arrogant, what we've really decided is, I'm God. I'm God. And God, through the prophet, says, look, arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. The problem with you being God is you don't know enough to be your own God, and you're not strong enough to handle the issues that are going to come your way. Notice the bullet point in your notes today. It says this, arrogant trust in your thoughts, abilities, and actions is going to result in a disregard for God. Arrogant trust in your thoughts and abilities and actions will result ultimately in disregard for God. In the book of Proverbs, which is a great book to wade through if you want to learn about life principles, chapter 16, it says this, pride goes before destruction. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. In other words, if you are prideful, if you're arrogant, if you are haughty, there are difficulties that are going to come into your life in the near future. But then he says, but blessed is the one who decides to trust in the Lord. Those are really your options. You can either trust in yourself, see how that's going to work, or you can trust in the Lord and say, God, I know that you have a plan for me so that I can keep calm and ultimately carry on. Usually, some of us Some of us, and you would know who you are. Some of us, we tend to have our default mode is that we're going to be self-reliant. We are problem solvers. I happen to be in that camp. A problem comes and I'm thinking, I will think my way through this. Yep, that's right. You can't mess with this stuff. That's steel. I used to say that to Mark, my kid. And I'd go, Mark, that part's steel. And then he'd come and he'd punch me in the gut. I'd bend over and he'd look at me like, you just said it was steel. And I'd go, not that part. You see, it's easy to think that you are made of steel. There is nobody that's made of steel. The other part, though, is that sometimes those of us that might not naturally be self-reliant, when God doesn't seem to show up on our timetable, we take over. And we're thinking, I'm just going to do this my way. Self-reliance is actually the doorway to disaster. Self-reliance, catch that phrase, is the doorway to disaster. Ever watch a scary movie? And in scary movies, somehow or another, the lights go off like the electricity went out, and people are in the house, and they're trying to get their way through there, and they're coming up to a door, and you know what's on the other side of the door. It's bad. You're screaming out, and you're going, no, do not open the door. Don't open the door. And sure enough, they always open the door. And check it out if I'm right or not. The second person that opens the door always dies. It's never the first person. It's always the second person, because the second person goes, well, nothing happened to the first guy, and the second guy goes through, and boom, that person is done. You and I have got to realize that arrogance, that self-reliance really is the doorway to difficulty in your life. So, back to that account. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, the Philistines go into battle. God didn't tell them to go into battle. They decided to do it their way, on their own. They lose 4,000 soldiers. So they come back and they regroup. Verse 3, chapter 4. Check it out. 1 Samuel, page 187. It says this: when the soldiers returned to camp, and imagine them going back into camp. It is not a happy day. They have lost a large amount of soldiers. They return to camp. The elders of Israel, the leaders, they huddle them up and they're going, hey, what happened? And this is what they conclude. Why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Where was God? They're blame shifting. They never once go, maybe we ought to think about this. We probably should not have done that. That thought never comes into their minds. So they decide they're going to come up with plan B. Have you ever done that? I'm going to come up with my own plan. I tried it this way. I'm going to go with plan B. Here it is. Notice the bullet point in your notes. Here's what it says. Self-reliance can be disguised in spiritual language. It can be disguised in spiritual language, quote unquote. Most of us, can we be honest this morning? Most of us, when we're about to do something our way, we don't go, well, God, I'm telling you, you're obviously a loser, so I'm going to do it my way. No, we don't do that. It's a lot more subtle than that. Back to that passage. 1 Samuel chapter 4, second part of verse 3. They come up with a plan. Here it is. Hey, here's an idea. Let us bring the Ark of the Lord's Covenant from Shiloh. You go, well, what is this Ark of the Lord's Covenant? What is the Ark of the Covenant? It was actually a box. It was actually a fancy box that God told Moses, I want you to develop this fancy box. We're going to call it the Ark of the Covenant. A covenant is the idea that God says, we're going to have a pact between me and you. I'm going to be your God. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to protect you. And to remind you of that as a symbol, I want you to create this box. The box is 4.5 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, about 1.5 feet thick. Inside the box are two things. They take the tablets from the 10 Commandments that you and I know as the 10 Commandments, and they place them in the box. They also take manna that God had given to them for 40 years to remind them God has taken care of us in the past, and they take it into the box. When Moses would meet with God, very often it would be at the Ark of the Covenant. So they come with an idea. They go, hey, you know why we lost? We didn't take God with us. They never still confer with God and say, hey, you think this is a good idea? Oh, no. They bring the magic box. And they decide, hey, let's see what happens. So they go and they get the magic box. And then it says this. In verse 10, it says, so the Philistines, after the Israelites had gone into battle, they fought, and the Israelites were defeated, and every man fled to his tent. Now, if you're an army and you're going backwards, you're going to lose. Every man is going to hide in his tent. Now, 4,000 had previously been wiped out. And it says this, the slaughter was very great. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. They lost 4,000 the first time. Now they lose 30,000, and they're going, man, this whole thing didn't work. So someone runs back into the city and begins to explain to the people, you thought it was bad last time? We're getting killed. We lost 4,000, now we lost 30,000. Where in the world is God? Eli, who happens to be the judge, the leader over Israel at the time, asked this young man who has come back into town, and oh, by the way, on his way there, he's ripped his clothes and he's thrown dust on his head, symbolically saying, it's bad. And so Eli says, hey, what really happened? Give me the news. I can handle it. Verse 16. It says, the man who brought the news replied this, Israel fled from the Philistines. The army suffered heavy losses. Oh, and by the way, your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. And the Ark of the Covenant, the God in a box, if you would, has been captured. The Philistines decide, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take your God in a box, and we're going to take it home with us. We're going to kick your butts. We just wiped out 34,000 of you, and now we're taking your God away from you. And so it says this, verse 18, when he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off his chair. By the side of his gate, his neck was broken, and he died. That's called bad news. You think that's bad, it gets a little bit worse. It says next in verse 19, his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant and near the time of delivery. Now, when she heard the news about the ark of God having been captured and her father-in-law dying and her husband dying, she went into labor and gave birth. But she was overcome, it says, by her labor pains as she was dying. Catch that phrase? As she was dying, verse 20, the women attending her said, don't despair. You have given birth to a son. Now listen to what she says. But she did not respond or pay any attention. She named the boy. Now think about names for your son. She comes up with a name. She's going to name her kid Ichabod. Anybody know any other sons that have been named Ichabod? Have you ever thought about naming your own kid Ichabod? You go, why would you name your kid Ichabod? Because it's a very poor-sounding name. You're going, here, Icky, come on. I mean, it just doesn't sound good. You wouldn't name your pet dog Ichabod. But what you and I don't catch at first glance is why she names her son Ichabod. Keep in mind, her father-in-law has died. Her husband has died, and the Ark of the Covenant has been carried away. The God in a box has been carried away into the Philistine nation. She decides she's going to name her son Ichabod. You know what the word kabod, the Hebrew word kabod, really has the idea of glory behind it. It was a beautiful word to the Israelites. They would use it a lot in referring to God. But if you put the letter I in front of kabod, it becomes Ichabod, and the letter I negates what the word that follows it means. So in other words, she's going to name her kid. There is no glory left here. In other words, we are losers. God has abandoned us. You ever been there? You're thinking, you know, these are tough times. These are tough times, and God's not showing up. And you know what happens when you don't think God shows up in tough times? You take over. And you become self-reliant. And you think, I've got to take care of myself. And God's saying all the way along, he says, hey, stay calm and carry on. He's saying, relax. I got this. I'm your shepherd. I'll provide for you. I will protect you. Remember, he said that I'll be the shepherd of your souls. 1861, interesting year. There was a pastor, actually not very far from here, near Philadelphia in a town called Ridleyville, that decided that he would write a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury. He wrote the letter, and in it he said this: One fact touching our currency has hitherto been seriously overlooked. 1861. I mean the recognition of the Almighty God in some form on our coins and bills. He writes that to the Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of Treasury responds not to him, but sends a note to the Mint in Philadelphia, to the director of the Mint in Philadelphia. In it, he says this: Dear sir, no nation can be strong except in the strength of God. The trust of our people in God should be declared on our national coins. And since that point in time, 1861, on every coin that you have, on every bill that you have, it says, in God we trust. Now, just to verify that this morning, what I'd like to do is collect $20 bills. So if you could get those out, because Carol and I would like to go to lunch on your $20 bills. Here's the thing. It says, in God we trust. Now, let me ask you a question. When you use the money that is in your wallet or the coins that are in your purse, you ever really think about trusting God? Actually, one of the things that can cause you not to trust God but trust yourself is your money. Because you go, you know what? It's okay. Look, I got enough money. We can live at least till 3 o'clock this afternoon. I'm good to go. I'm fine. David, follower of God in the Old Testament, said this. Listen to these words, Psalm chapter 31. He cries out to God and he says, I am forgotten as though I were dead. Where are you, God? I am forgotten as though I were dead. I've become like broken pottery. All of us, from time to time, have to realize we're pottery. And we have cracks. Broken pottery. He goes on, there are people that are conspiring against me. And then he says in verse 14, a key verse. You might want to jot this down. Psalm chapter 31, verse 14. Psalm chapter 31 and verse 14. He says, but despite the fact that I feel like I'm forgotten as though I'm dead, I feel like I am broken pottery, there are people conspiring against me, but I trust in you, Lord. You are my God. God, I'm going to trust in you. You are my God. You're the one I'm going to follow. Keep calm and carry on. Keep calm and carry on. Question is, what's the solution to self-reliance? I'll tell you what it's not. It's number 3 in your notes. The solution to self-reliance is not inaction. The solution to self-reliance is not in action. Have you heard the phrase, let go and let God? Sounds sort of spiritual, doesn't it? Just let go and let God. He'll just sort of do whatever. You don't have to do anything. That's not true. Jesus, take the wheel. Have you heard that song? Sounds really good, but you know, every time we give Jesus the wheel, we're going, yeah, but I still got the brake. I still take care of the gas. Jesus, take the wheel. Sounds spiritual, but it really isn't a great idea. The greatest catastrophic nuclear disaster happened in the Soviet Union. Chernobyl, you most likely know about what happened. Here's the synopsis, the Reader's Digest version of what happened. 1982, 1984, 1985, they ran tests on the reactor. Every time it failed. They decide in 1986 they're going to run the very same test. Now keep in mind, it is the 4th time. The idea of running this test is they are going to close off the cooling system and see what happens. Doesn't sound like a good idea. But they close it off and the alarms go off. And so what they do, rather than responding to the alarms, they close off the alarms. And literally within a very short period of time, the lid of the reactor blows off. You know what they did? They had an opportunity to stop the test, but they did nothing. Doing nothing is not the answer. You and I have got to figure out, okay, if we are to be reliant upon God and not self-reliant, if we're to be God-dependent, not self-reliant, what is that going to look like? What is that going to look like? It's number 4 in your notes this morning. The solution to self-reliance is taking the right actions. Taking the right actions. The solution Self-reliance is taking the right actions. You see, God has his responsibility. You and I have our responsibility. God says, look, I love you. I want to take care of you. I'll provide for you. I will protect you. That's God's role. What's your role? I want to give you a number of bullet points. Here they are. Your role is this. First bullet point. Recognize you are not able to overcome the issue. You are not able to overcome the issue. Recognize that. Jesus, in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, preached his longest recorded sermon. And in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 4, he says something that at first glance doesn't make sense. He says, blessed, and the word blessed there has the idea of filled with contentment and joy. Blessed are those who mourn. That doesn't make any sense. Why would I be content and joy-filled if I'm mourning, if I'm weeping and wailing? Because he says this at the end of that verse. He says, for they will be comforted. Not they might be, they will be comforted. God specializes in coming into your life and my life when we are face to face with difficult circumstances that are beyond our control that we can't fix. He specializes in that. What you and I have to do is we have got to recognize that we cannot overcome the issue before us. You got any of those things in your life right now? Think about it for a moment. What's in your world right now that you're going, you know what, I can't fix this. I can't fix this. Your natural response will be to be anxious, to worry, to be fretful, to be self-reliant, to try to fix it. God says, stay calm and carry on. I got this. Here's the second step you'll need to take. Understand that God desires to work in the struggle that you are facing. Understand that God desires to work in the struggle that you are facing. Eric Liddell, the Olympic runner seen in the movie Chariots of Fire, you might have seen that, said this. Listen to these words. Circumstances may appear to wreck our lives and God's plans, but God is not helpless among the ruins. I want to say this to you today. Very often, God shows up in a supernatural way in the ruins of your life and mine. When things are not going well, God shows up. Perhaps he's there all the time, but we just didn't see it. But he shows up, and all of a sudden we're going, whoa, God, I really need for you to do something in my life. The Apostle Paul, who wrote about 2/3 of the New Testament, struggled in his life with many, many things. Most likely toward the end of his life, the last 10 years or so of his life, most likely he's going blind. And he says this, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, listen to it, 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 8. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it, what he calls a thorn in the flesh. This painful issue in my life, 3 times I pleaded with him to take it away. God didn't take it away. Because isn't that your natural plea? God, this part's messed up, so if you could take it away, that'd be really good. And if you could do it by Tuesday, that'd be super cool. He says, I prayed about this thing 3 times. God didn't take it away, but God spoke to him. Listen to what God said. God said to him, my grace is going to be sufficient for you. I'm going to take care of you in the midst of this messiness. Then he says, my power, listen to this, my power is made perfect in weakness. My power is made perfect in weakness. He's saying, if you want to really see my power, then understand your weakness, understand there are situations, scenarios of your life that are beyond your ability, and that's when I show up in a powerful, powerful way. And so what did Paul do? He goes on to say this. He says, therefore, in light of that God shows up when I'm weak, when I can't handle the future, he says, I'll boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses. I'll look forward to seeing what God is going to do so that, he says, so that Christ's power may rest on me. You see, weakness is really a welcome sign on the door of your heart that says, God, come inside. Come inside. Difficulties are invitations for you and for me to invite God into our lives. You and I have got to understand that. Then we've got to add this component, next bullet point. Decide to actively listen. Trust and act. Decide to actively listen, Trust and act on what God says daily. Decide to listen actively. Trust actively. Act actively on what God says daily. There's an interesting passage. John chapter 9. John chapter 9, Jesus is walking through a city, and he sees a blind man over to the side, and he addresses that issue. In this passage, he's going to heal that blind man, but I don't want to concentrate on the end result. I want you to grab a hold of the question the disciples ask him, because it's the question that you and I tend to ask. Here it is. John chapter 9, verse 1. As Jesus went along, he saw a blind man who was blind from birth. This man has never seen. His disciples ask him a question. Rabbi, teacher, that's what rabbi means. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? God, there's something up. Obviously, somebody did something, because it surely can't be your plan for some poor person to be born blind. That's just wrong. What's with that, Jesus? Jesus answers it in a very profound way. Listen to what he says. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. Now, you got to just picture the disciples are going, what? Because their theology is going to get messed up, because they're thinking, hey, if there's something going on in somebody's life, they've obviously done something wrong, and they deserve it. And Jesus says, nope, that's not the way it is. Then he says this. Listen to these words. But this happened so that, don't you just want to know what he's going to say next? But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Do you hear that? But this happened so that the works of God, God's power, might be displayed, might be seen by him, might be seen by others in his life, because he has this difficulty. So catch this thought. When God allows an issue to come into your life, or when, let's be honest, when you mess up and bring an issue into your life, or someone else brings an issue into your life, that God gave permission for that to happen, it is an opportunity for you to see God show up in your life in a supernatural way. But what's going to take is you're going to first have to listen. I got to tell you, when there is something going on in my life, my default mode is not listening. I'm a doer. I want to just do. It doesn't matter if it's wrong. I just want to do it. I just want to do, because I'm going to fix it somehow. And God goes, whoa, Jack, slow down. Listen to me. Because when messiness comes into your world, God's going to speak to you. He's going to tell you what to do. Then you're going to have to make a decision. Will I trust him enough that I will act on what he tells me to do? He says he's your shepherd. He's going to protect you, going to provide for you. Will you trust him? Will you trust him? Will you trust him? Here's the last point, and it's very vitally important. You and I need to understand this. You might be one massive decision away from a totally different life. You might be one massive decision away from a totally different life. You go, well, what's the decision? Here it is. Are you willing to decide right now, today, right now? Are you willing to decide right now at 10:58 on a Sunday morning? Are you willing to make a massive decision that basically says, God, you are God, I am not. I'm going to trust you. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, but I'm going to decide today. And when you tell me to do something, the answer is going to be yes, because you're God, and I'm not. Are you willing to make that massive decision? Now you say, so if I make that massive decision, is it over then? Oh, no. Here's how it works. You make that massive decision, you drive a stake in the ground and go, God, I'm going to choose to trust in you. And choose to trust in you. But if you're like me, you're going to have to remind yourself that you made that decision. I don't know about you, but like my memory is as good as nothing. I can literally walk from the kitchen back into my office, and by the time I get there, I'm going, no idea why I walked back here. Gone. And honestly, that's how I can tend to live life. I've made that massive decision. God, you're God, I'm not. I'm going to trust you. You're my shepherd. You're going to take care of me. I'm going to rely upon you. But then something happens. And my default mode is I'm going to fix that. My default mode is I'm going to stop that. My default mode is I'm going to clean that up. I'm going to address that issue. And God goes, keep calm and carry on. Trust me. Are you willing today to make that massive decision? Psalm chapter 22, last verse. Psalm chapter 22, verse 19 says, but you, Lord, do not be far from me, for you are my strength. Come quickly to help me. God, you're my strength. Come quickly to help me. Are you willing today to make that massive decision that says, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm not going to rely on me. I'm going to rely on you. You say, does that mean I shouldn't be overly confident? Oh, no. You should have all the confidence in the world. Not in yourself, but in him. Does that make sense? Are you willing today to really trust him? Here's the simple truth this morning. Determine now to rely upon God. Determine now to rely upon God for the daily issues so that when major struggles arrive, you will know God can be trusted. Decide today to trust him in the daily issues so that when a major issue, when a major struggle comes in your life, you will know that God can be trusted. Because if you wait till the big one comes, it's going to be a lot harder. If you decide today, I'm going to make a massive decision, there is one God and you are not him. And he's in charge and you're not. When the struggles come, it's going to be so much easier to trust him. Trust him in the little things. See him work in the little things, and when the big things come, you can go, you know what, this is an opportunity. I'm going to see God do something in my life. You want to see that? It starts by you and I surrendering to him. I give up. I can't live my life on my own. I've tried. It doesn't work. Pray with me this morning, will you? Father, remind us today that you are incredibly trustworthy. Remind us today that it doesn't work when we rely upon ourselves. Help us even right now to make that one massive decision. As we're praying this morning, would you take a moment right where you are? Would you be willing to make that one massive decision? If you are, just quietly in your mind, just say to God, God, I do want to recognize that you're the Lord of my life, the leader of my life. And I'm choosing right now to trust you for the daily issues and for the big struggles that are going to come in my life down the road. Show yourself to be powerful in my life. Well, Father, I thank you that when we decide to live as sheep, you show up as the shepherd. For that today, I am so thankful. Father, I'm thankful for the decisions that have been made all across this gym this morning. And I pray that you would help us to drive a stake into the ground, to recognize you are God and we are not. Help us to escape the world of self-reliance, to enter in the daily living of God dependence. Thanks for loving us today. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Stand together. Let's sing.